In this video we want to talk about strategic management and more specifically Michael Porter's 5 forces model. Now this is the subject matter of several other videos on the course, and it's worth looking at those and indeed doing some research into the PDFs as well, and padding out your notes to make sure you have a good understanding of this particular model. It is talked about extensively within the business and management areas. It gets a lot of exposure within the literature, and it's widely talked about, and it's important you understand the model and be fluent in the issues that it raises and how it goes about its analysis. If we look at the model, it is focused in on the competitive rivalry that exists between the companies in a particular market. The companies are fighting for customer attention and for sales, and they're competing using various strategies, prices, marketing, design, aftercare, after sales service, and so on. But in situations where the market is not growing, let's say in situations where it's a fixed market size, then of course whatever one company gains, the other company is going to lose. This is sometimes referred to as a zero-sum situation in economics. So whatever one gains, the other loses. In that case, the competitive rivalry is very pronounced. It's very deep and very threatening to the companies, and they must pay particular attention to each other's strategies. Now, feeding into this competitive rivalry, or feeding in terms of the determinants of the competitive rivalry, are the suppliers, which we'll talk about later on in this video, and the substitute goods that are available for the products. So if a company has a particular product, then the other companies who are involved in the market will look to innovate the products and change the products and thereby outcompete the company. So there is the constant threat of substitute goods. Of course, the buyers will also have an influence on the competitive situation, and we'll talk about that as well. And finally, there will be the potential for new entrants, for new companies to enter the market, so that the marketplace itself is quite dynamic. It's changing. So this is the basis of the model. Here are the 5 forces: suppliers, substitutes, buyers, potential entrants, and of course competitive rivalry itself. So we have 5 different circles here. We can see that 4 of them are feeding into the central one. Now, other firms in other industries offering substitute products. Well, there's competitive pressure coming from the market, the attempts of outsiders to win buyers over to their products. So firms are not passive within markets. Generally speaking, they wish to be recognized by the customers, they wish to have a dominant place in the market, they wish to secure their position and enhance their reputation and image. Therefore, they are constantly fighting amongst themselves, amongst the companies who are in the market, constantly jockeying for position in the market, and they're doing this by developing substitute products, products which have additional features or have been innovated slightly, and perhaps the innovations have been the product of market research which has been conducted, or feedback from customers. So the firms are evolving and changing, modifying the product. Of course, there will be periods in which the innovation will slow down and the degree of differentiation between the products may diminish for some time before innovation kicks in again. Perhaps innovation is dependent on prevailing technology and advances in technology. Suppliers of key inputs, of course, are important because the price of the key inputs and the supply of the key inputs will go to determine the costs of production and the availability of the product. So key suppliers are clearly important, as indeed are the customers, the buyers of the product, the individuals who will use their scarce resource, cash, their scarce resource in the form of money they've received perhaps from wages and salaries from working. So it's a scarce resource and they're going to use this to acquire the product. Therefore, the buyers are going to perhaps carefully consider their expenditure. They're going to analyze the situation. They're going to analyze the various products that are available and carefully sort out the one that's most appropriate for them in the context of value for money. And of course, there's also the constant pressure or potential, I should say, of new entrants, companies who are on the edge of the market watching, and if profitability in the market was to increase, this may induce them in to be competitors. So if companies are aware of what existing companies are making in terms of profits and return on investment, if that is significant, they may be encouraged in. This will make the competitive situation in the market far more complex and far more difficult for the existing firms to accommodate the new entrants. And of course there's just a rivalry between the existing sellers, the competitive pressures and looking for competitive advantage. The existing ones who are there are constantly trying to outmaneuver each other in terms of reducing prices, having marketing campaigns, giving good aftercare service, advertising campaigns and so on, trying to undermine the rivals. So companies have a very complex picture to deal with. They have the rivalry that exists at the moment, the existing companies that are in the market and fighting for their survival and fighting to make their mark in the market. Then there's the buyers who will have all sorts of influences on them, tax burdens, increasing tax burdens, threats of unemployment, all sorts of factors that impinge upon the buyers, and they'll have to use their scarce resource, money, to acquire the goods. So the buyers will do research and try to find out what is the best option for them. And suppliers of key inputs, as I said earlier, who will also determine the price of the product and the cost of the product to produce, and the substitute products that may also arrive in the market. So it's a very complex picture. It's not an easy one to deal with. Most of us, we think of a problem and we deal with the problem. We normally think of one problem at a time and try to deal with it. Here's a situation where, in a sense, everything is moving, and the business person has to look at all of this complexity, all of this movement, because all of these are evolving and changing over time. And the business person has got to make decisions which will enable the business to survive. And that, of course, is complicated. Now let's look at the competitive forces. Well, if a business wants to succeed, it must develop strategies to counter these forces. For example, rivalry of competitors, the threat of new entrants, the threat of substitutes, the bargaining power of the customers, and the bargaining power of the suppliers. Now, those are the 5 forces. So if a business wants to succeed, it must develop strategies to counter these forces. It must deal with them. There are 5 big areas that the business must look into. Now, the strategies that could be used to try and deal with these competitive forces, well, the company could try to control its costs and try to outmaneuver the others by being very efficient in terms of production and delivery, and thereby able to compete more effectively in the marketplace. It could differentiate the product, come up with an innovative design which will win over the customers. It could innovate. It could innovate radically, not just differentiate in a small scale. It could innovate the product radically. Famous examples: telephones, mobile phones, or cell phones as the Americans call them. Cell phones have been around for quite some time, and then iPhone appeared, which was a radical innovation. Growth, to try and grow the company, to try and beat the others by virtue of the company's size, and try to be able to negotiate discounts and favourable terms from the banks and discounts on raw materials, and just by virtue of its size, so trying to grow the organisation. And also forming alliances with other companies, forming agreements to enter certain markets and support each other, and perhaps also share facilities and share assets, perhaps share distribution channels. And there are other strategies which, depending on the nature of the good, that could be pursued. Let's talk about the competitive strategies, because these are aimed at trying to deal with these competitive forces that Porter has identified, the 5 of them on the left-hand side here. So let's see what we can do with the competitive strategies. We'll start with the cost leadership one. Well, become a low-cost producer. It's probably easier said than done, but the company would have to look for efficiencies, cost savings within the organization, and perhaps automate processes, and perhaps even invest initially in new equipment, perhaps labor-saving equipment, and try to outmaneuver the others by virtue of cost, try to cut the price because the costs are cheaper, and try to in that way outcompete the other companies in the market. Could be that they want to help suppliers or customers reduce costs. They want to present the customer with cheaper options, and in that way win part of the market. And it might be that they want to even segment the market somewhat and offer perhaps versions which are extremely cheap and pick up the whole market, or extend the market to customers who previously were not buying it but now could afford to buy it because it's cheaper, as well as keeping the premium end for the more affluent purchasers. There are dangers there, of course, that the branding of the product may be damaged. People who spend a lot on the product and see it as an expensive product may think it's been devalued by having a lower priced version. It could try to increase cost to competitors. How it would do this is difficult to imagine, but it could, for example, if it managed to cut its own costs, then talk to suppliers of raw materials and try to get them not to be so favourable to the competitors. It sounds a mean thing to do, and it's difficult to imagine, but some companies may try that sort of tactic. So as to increase the cost to the competitors, make it more difficult for the competitors, perhaps try to monopolize the distribution channel and make it difficult for the competitors to use that particular channel by offering more favorable payments to different parts of the channel, so that they stock only that particular good. So the competitors find it difficult to place their products in front of the customers. Not a particularly nice thing to do, but it's a possibility. Differentiation strategy, well, develop ways to differentiate the firm's products from the competitors. Now, they may differentiate products in two ways, which are quite popular in economics, particularly in a model called monopolistic competition, which is also the subject matter of a video on the course. In the model of monopolistic competition, differentiation is very important, and there it's generally written up that differentiation can take place in two ways. There can be physical differentiation. Physical differentiation means the products look different, they behave differently. So it may not be a significant difference, but just enough to mark it off from the crowd, mark it off from the competitors. So it could be a physical difference. Or it could be a psychological difference. It could be because of, let's say, repetitive advertising, that a difference is created in the mind of the purchaser, that they believe that this product is superior. It could be that differentiation is based on segments or niches of the market. They differentiate the product so it can enter into different segments. Like I said earlier, in the context of cost leadership, they can differentiate the product, cut out a lot of the functionality perhaps, and trim it down and offer it for sale in different segments of the market. And in that way it becomes differentiated. It's different. It has different versions for different segments of the market. So it could be through advertising, differentiating in the mind of the customer. They believe that the product is different. It could be physical. It could be an actual difference in the product. Care has to be taken in dealing with this strategy, because it should be based on market research and customer feedback and involvement, because it is altering the product, and they could alter it for the worst. It could lead to a deterioration in sales, not necessarily an increase in sales. So their alterations may not be well received by the customers. So they have to take a lot of care in undertaking the differentiation strategy. Innovation strategy. Well, find new ways of doing business. It's, in a sense, it's as simple as that. Look for unique products or services or unique markets. Try to find something which is unique, something different about the product. Try to find something that the others are not doing or they haven't got, and that the customers would find attractive and useful. That's innovation. That's perhaps taking an invention and making it commercial. It's still the product, but now additional features have been added to it. We get this in electronics all the time. A telephone now, as I mentioned telephone earlier, but telephone now makes phone calls, but it also, we can get television on the telephone. We can get radio. We can send instant messages and emails and surf the net, and these are extra facilities that have come that have made telephones more desirable. Radical changes to business processes to alter the fundamental structure of an industry. Well, the idea of radical changes, big changes, it may sound good, but it can be dangerous. Excuse me. In the same way I said that differentiation, big differentiation, could be dangerous, this could be dangerous. It would have to be based on customers' views. There should be focus groups and testing and surveys and involvement of customers and feedback from marketing personnel and so on before anything radical takes place. Otherwise, it may be rejected by the customers. So whatever changes are to be introduced, whatever innovations are going to be introduced, they should have been tested in terms of customer reactions before they were implemented and before significant investment took place indeed to bring these about. The growth strategy, well, expand the company's capacity to produce. Try to enable the company to produce more. By producing more, it will damage the competitors. There will be more of the product on the market, the prices will start to fall, and perhaps higher cost producers who currently exist in the market will be forced out. They will look for alternatives and will switch from making this product to making something else. It could be that they want to simply expand into global markets, take the product and try and launch the product elsewhere, and in that way grow the market. The market is much bigger to them. It's not the domestic market which is highly competitive. They might find markets elsewhere where the customers there are not being served and the product would be welcomed. It could be that they want to diversify into new products or services. So in that way they want to grow the business. They may look at the existing product and think there are related products that could be developed using essentially the same technology, the same skills and competencies of the workforce, that just can diversify into making something similar and yet different. So it's looking to develop a new market or develop into a new market. So it'll have, in a sense, two strings to its bow. It can continue with the existing product and now develop a new product, related product perhaps, but into a different market. So it's diversifying its risk. The alliance strategy, well, establish linkages and alliances with customers, suppliers, competitors, consultants and other companies. Try to develop relationships with different stakeholders in this particular market in this case. Look at the customers and try to form the customers into groupings, get them to sign up to the company website so that they're able to receive a newsletter. They're able to, in a sense, work with the company and feedback to the company and to feel a part of the company. They may want to establish linkages with the suppliers and seem to be helpful with the suppliers, perhaps sharing distribution facilities and transport. And helping the suppliers in that way means the suppliers will help them back. In fact, they might want to talk to some competitors and start to share facilities with some of the competitors, and in that way gain from economies of scale, economies of size. They're able to function, they're able to specialize in some particular parts, whilst their competitor in the alliance will focus on a different part, and then they will simply assemble or put it together and then compete. So alliances are a possibility. They're simply sharing production and distribution capability. They have agreements. They're acting friendly towards each other, and they're in agreement, and they're trying to reduce costs and survive in the market. The policy could include mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, and virtual companies. It may be difficult to implement the strategy because the government likes to see companies being competitive, because that's how customers benefit from lower prices. When companies are competing, prices are being forced downwards, and the customer benefits from that. If the companies are starting to form into one big company, in other words, there's the start of the formation of a monopoly through mergers and acquisitions and so on, then the government may intervene and stop it from happening, legally stop it from happening, may have an inquiry into the business to see what the effects of this merger and acquisition and so on would be, and if it's felt to be against the public interest, it would be stopped. So mergers and acquisitions and joint ventures and so on, they sound cooperative and a way of surviving and dealing with the competitive strategy or dealing with some of the issues in the 5 forces that we talked about earlier, and this particular strategy seems to be a way around it, but it may not be allowed. The government may intervene and stop it. The other strategies, well, first of all, it's not really other strategies, more to say that strategies themselves are not mutually exclusive. Companies may pursue all the strategies here. They may pursue growth, innovation, differentiation, cost leadership. They may be trying to achieve all of these simultaneously. They might be focusing in on differentiation and innovation. They might be focusing in on cost leadership and growth. They're not mutually exclusive. If a company chooses one, it can choose a different one as well. It doesn't have to stick to one. Organizations use one, or they can use one, or they can use all. They can use any different combination. It's up to them. If it works for them, then there's nothing to stop them doing it. The only thing they've got to watch out for is in the context of the alliance, as I said, to make sure that it's not against the public interest. If it is, the government may want to intervene. So these are some of the competitive strategies that we can envisage that will go to try and deal with the 5 issues that Porter observed and wrote up. And that gives us an overview of the Porter's approach in terms of the 5 forces and then the competitive strategies. And it gives us an insight into the workings of markets and indeed into the complexity of markets. That's all we need to do here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.